Good morning everyone, Peter Newman from RE here. Thanks for logging on. We've got a good group coming on this morning. 130 odd people have registered for the webinar. There's 38 of you out there now. So yeah, I'll just do a couple of minutes of housekeeping and then introduce the topic and so on. I've got Grant Thompson with me this morning and yeah, Grant and I will be talking about spraying small radish and a bit of research and also a bit of experience, but more about that in a minute. Firstly, just about WeedSmart. WeedSmart's an industry initiative where the chemical companies and a seed company and GRDC pull some money together every year, and the idea being to put out a consistent message through the industry about managing weeds, and in particular managing resistant weeds. We had the AGM just on Friday in Melbourne, and WeedSmart is going strong. I think we're 2.5 or 3 years into WeedSmart now, and there's guaranteed a couple more years of funding from the companies and GRDC, and hopefully long beyond that. So WeedSmart, it should be around for a while hopefully, and if not for the long term. Yeah, it's a good initiative to just keep a consistent message out there to just keep growers aware of the issue of resistant weeds and also how to manage them. So just a couple of minutes of housekeeping while a few other people are logging on. Just get my screen working here. You'll see that you have the menu box open for the webinar. If that's in the way of the screen, you might like to click on that orange and white icon, that arrow, to just minimise that so it's out of the way. Now, a good thing to do is to have lots of questions come in during these webinars. That's really the strength of a webinar. So please type in questions as you go. So there should be a questions box or a chat box in your menu. So if you have a question, just enlarge your menu, type a question in, and we'll get to most of them as the webinar goes. So yeah, that'll be great. Now if you have any problems, there's a couple of numbers to write down here. If you happen to drop out, you can get back on by going to that web address there and typing in that webinar ID number. But probably the easiest way to go is to write down that mobile number there. Kate Lay from Coccinall is in the co-pilot seat this morning, and Kate should be able to fix any problems that you have. So yeah, write down Kate's mobile number now, and if you have a problem when the webinar is going, give her a call. Hopefully she doesn't get 10 calls at once. Okay, so we've got 50 people logged on out there now, so that's great. We'll make a start, and we'll get into it. So I'll introduce Grant Thompson. Grant is an agronomist in the area here. He's got his own company called Crop Circle Consulting, and also spends a lot of his time working for Landmark agronomy clients. Grant's pushing 20 years in the grains industry and about 17 or 18 as a full-time field agronomist. And Grant's with us this morning. G'day, mate.
G'day.
Tomo, you've been working in this field for 18 years, struggling with wild radish all of those years. What are you seeing out there in terms of how people are going managing radish these days? Are they having a win, or is it getting worse in WA?
If you asked me that question 7, 8 years ago, I would have said we're losing in the battle. But I think the evolution of herbicide spraying of wild radish, the change in mindset of growers and advisors and agronomists has been such that I think we're evolving our management better than we've ever done before, and we're well on top of the problem, to the point now where I think we are depleting the weed seed bank, keep our paddocks and crops clean, and I think we're well on top of the problem.
Yeah, I'd agree. I see a lot of cleaner crops than ever. We get busloads of growers coming to Western Australia in spring to do a field tour, and they want to come and see these fields full of wild radish and see the scale of this problem, and they're very disappointed when they get off the bus and find very clean crops. So we'll talk a bit about how that's happening. Now I wanted to start with this slide here, and once again, Tomo, I mean, you and I were agronomists in the late 90s, and you've stayed with it ever since, but I've moved on to other things. But that there is a large wild radish in about a 5-leaf wheat crop. That would have been back in the day, $5 worth of MCPA ally or something like that, we would have delayed spraying until this time so that we know we can kill those radish, and we're trying to get the late germination as well. So that was old school, wasn't it? That's how we used to do it.
Yeah, we used to do something like 500 of MCPA LVE, 3 or 4 grams of ally, and I even remember, guys chucking in 5 to 7 grams of low gram for good measure, just to help it out. And we could kill, in some cases, flowering radish with that herbicide mix. We'd be quite reluctant to go anywhere near that sort of strategy nowadays.
Yeah, and there's parts of the country where you can probably do that now, but we would not get near our radish these days with a brew like that in this part of the world. Having said that, our crops are cleaner than ever. So what we are on about today is the work is about spraying small radish twice and painted on. I've got there. That means you've got to have excellent coverage. So I've introduced Grant, but I haven't introduced myself. I'm Peter Newman, working with RE, the RE communications team. It's our job to communicate RE's research around the country, and we do a lot of information transfer through a lot of different channels, and WeedSmart is one of them. So RE is managing the WeedSmart project at the moment, and we are running that project, and this webinar is part of that. So let's get into it. Let's start having a look at the information that we have. I'll talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'll hand over to Grant to talk about his trials. And so this is where it started. It started back in 2012. GRDC have the RCSN, so the Regional Cropping Solutions Network, so groups of growers and agronomists and consultants and bankers and people meet in small groups and work out what the priorities for research in the different regions are. The Geraldton group had $50,000 to spend on whatever piece of research they could, and for 2 years in a row they spent it on wild radish. So they could have spent it on any agricultural issue, they spent it on wild radish. And the idea was to look at these objectives. So find some really nasty radish out there, and then we wanted to work out how to kill that radish with something other than just 2 sprays of Velocity. So Velocity, of course, is the new Bayer product that came along a few years ago, just in the nick of time, really, just when we were really in trouble. Pyrosulfatol plus bromoxynil, and brilliant herbicide, very safe on the crop. And we got to the point in this region of WA where growers were spraying 2 shots of Velocity because it was the only reliable herbicide they had left. And so we knew that we would break it if our solution to our problem was just to use 2 shots of Velocity and that's it. So the idea was to do some research, do some trials that came up with something other than just 2 hits of Velocity. So one of the trials that I will talk about now was on the Smarts property at Minda, which is just northeast of Geraldton. It was a bit of a late crop, so it was an early June towing, and the paddock had an accidental burn, so the stubble had been burnt. Sown to wheat, of course. There's a picture of the trial there when the crop was at about 5 leaf stage. And we had 2 times of spraying. We had a first time of spraying when the wheat was at 2.5 to 3 leaf with 76 litres of water, and we had very small radish, so cotyledon to 2 leaf radish at that stage. And the second time of spraying about 5 or 6 weeks later there, we had to spray across the plot, so we had to slow down, so that had to go on at 100 litres of water per hectare. And the radish at this stage was at 4 to 6 leaf, 10 to 15 centimetre stage. The crop was around about 5 to 6 leaf. So this is a later crop than we would normally have at this time, in this region. But that's just the way the season played that year. Now we've already seen this photo, but that's what the radish looked like on the 8th of August, where they had no first spray, and so we did find a good site. There's just another shot of them there. And that's the crop on the 8th of August. So 8th of August is when the second spray went on. So it wasn't a great crop. It was only a lowish yielding crop, as I said, a late sown crop. And yeah, it's about 5 or 6 leaf stage on the 8th of August. So I'm going to go through some photos of the trial now, and then I'll show the trial data. And so keeping in mind that we had either, as a first spray, we had a nil, a Velocity, Tigrex or Flight, and then the second spray on the 8th of August. And these photos were taken after the second spray on the nil area. So we had Amicide and Linuron as one of the treatments in there. Turned out to be not a good idea for other reasons. We'll talk about that. There's a litre of Velocity, doing a very good job as you would expect. Very, very clean, very, very safe. And these are the second sprays, keep in mind. So these are the sprays that were sprayed on the 8th of August. 2 litres of bromoxynil MCPA. Now that looks very, very good there, but you'll see in the data later that we had a lot of radish grow back from that plot. Amicide plus Diuron plus Ecopar, from memory, was very clean for a while, but then took some yield off the crop, so we weren't too happy with that one. There's the nil, so that's what the radish, unsprayed radish looked like. So these photos taken early September. Amicide Diuron. So once again, I think the Diuron gave us some yield penalty, and you can see that these photos are taken about a month after spraying, and you can see that they're still looking sick, the radish, but they're not quite dying, and at this point we don't know whether these radish are going to die or not. Precept and Ecopar, very clean but very damaging. When we turned up at the trial, we could see big yellow strips running through the plots from miles away, and it was the Precept Ecopar treatment, so I wouldn't recommend that one. Another photo of 2,4-D, so this is 2,4-D LV680. Once again, you can see the radish looks sick, and once again we're not sure if it's going to die. This was the one reliable treatment in the whole trial that gave good control as a one spray strategy late. So bromoxynil MCPA plus Precept. And so it really does show that we are down to one last reliable herbicide. Even though we've got a lot of treatments in this trial that ended up working, this is the only one that worked on the big radish with a late spray only. And once again, 2,4-D amine, you can see that they're sick. Are they going to die or not? And the ester, same thing. Bromime Diuron, you can see there that we've blown some leaves off and we've got some radish recovering. I'll quickly go through these. Precept was also very slow to kill the plants. So here's the data. This slide's going to take a little while for you to digest. I'll see if I can get the pointer going. So we have in the, just give me a moment. We have the blue bars are where there was nil first spray. The red bar is where there was Tigrex at the 2-leaf stage. The green bar is where there was flight at the 2-leaf stage, and the purple bar is where we had velocity at the 2-leaf stage. And so these were all, this is where we had those treatments first and nil second spray. And so this blue bar here is the nil, and we can see that the early spray did a great job, but we also had late germinators as well. So all of the early sprays did a good job at controlling the cotyledon to 2-leaf radish that was there. And then we can see through the rest of the treatment trial here that these blue bars, where there was nil first spray, and this big range of second sprays, we always had surviving radish, except for that one reliable treatment, as I said, the bromoxynil MCPA at a litre plus 1.5 litres of Precept 150. So that really does show that two things. One, there's only one reliable single spray strategy, but it also shows that all of the 2 spray strategies worked well. So wherever we use Tigrex, flight or velocity first, followed by any of these treatments, we had a very good result. And keep in mind that we asked the agronomists to take us to the worst part of radish on the worst radish farm that they could find. And so this wasn't the most resistant radish that you can find in Western Australia, but it's up there. It is good resistant radish. And so this was an eye-opener to us, that we found that we could kill this radish with a heap of different brews as long as we sprayed it small and we sprayed it twice. Okay. Now, keep those questions coming in. There's probably questions about now, so I can't see a question yet. But if you have a question, please put it in now and we can answer it as we go. All right, moving along. This is just zooming in a little bit. So now I've taken away all of the nil first spray treatments, And so this is just the treatments where we have had a first spray of Tigrex Flight or Velocity followed by any one of these other treatments. And as you can see, so this is just zooming in and changing this scale here. So as we said, one early first spray followed by nothing, gave good control, but we still, and this is wild radish per plot, we still had 5 or 6 wild radish per plot, whereas just about all of the other treatments, I mean, it's starting to get a little bit less reliable out here with just bromoxynil MCPA or Brom-MA plus diuron, so that's not quite strong enough. But interesting that all of these treatments, a lot of them including 2,4-D amine or LV ester, worked. And the very interesting thing was, you saw the photos earlier that we weren't sure whether the 2,4-D was going to kill them. Well, I had to count the weeds in this trial 4 times because I kept going back and finding surviving weeds. And it ended up taking 8 weeks for these amicide treatments and these ester treatments to kill the radish, but it eventually died. And so it really just showed us that if we get an early spray on, even if we're only going back with 2,4-D, even if we know that there's some 2,4-D resistance there, if we've sprayed very small radish with a somewhat competitive crop around it, we often can kill some of those radish in a resistance situation if we spray them small enough. Now that doesn't work for every population of radish. The very highly resistant ones, it probably won't work. However, in this trial with normal resistance, we found that that we could kill the radish with spraying small weeds. Here is the yield of the first spray treatments. So we can see basically that the velocity, wherever velocity was used first in this trial, it yielded around about 100 kilos per hectare more than the rest. As you can see, not very good yielding wheat. It was not a great year and it was a late sown crop, but interesting that the velocity first gave higher yield than the other treatments. Now to be fair, Flight and Tigrex both have MCPA in them. It was applied at about the 2.5 leaf stage of the crop, which is before the recommended timing window of those treatments, and so that possibly has knocked the crop around a little bit by going a bit early with that MCPA. The question just come in asking what it was resistant to, and I actually don't have the resistance test in front of me, but I know that there's definitely resistance to 2,4-D, 2,4-D, definitely the group B resistance, so the SU resistance, and also some resistance to diflufenicin. I think it was about 50% resistance to diflufenicin. Okay, nearly finished for my part. This is the yield of the second spray treatments averaged out. So this just points out that amicide linearon, which is an off-label thing I think, damaged the crop, so we don't want to do that. And the Brom-MA diuron also took some yield off the crop, but all the other treatments were fine. Precept Eco-Par, as I said, was very, very damaging, somehow managed to recover. I still wouldn't recommend it. It looks like it might have taken a little bit of yield out of it, but yeah, it looked extremely damaging in the field. I don't think growers would be happy with that. And this is a very busy one, and you can't digest all of this, but this is just to show the importance of that. This is just to show how velocity yielded more. So these purple bars are the yield of all of the velocity treatments. And so in each case you can see that velocity always, just about in every case, yielded a little bit more than the other pre-emergent treatments. So you've already seen that, but that does just show just how velocity as a first treatment did yield very well. So that's it from me. The conclusions were that velocity first was a high yield. The second spray strategy always killed the radish, so having 2 sprays, any combination of just about all of the 2 sprays worked. Phenoxy second was very, very slow, but it did end up killing the radish. We saw phytotoxicity from Precept plus Eco-Par. We also saw it from Brom-MA diuron and some yield loss there. And the yield loss that we saw was Brom-MA diuron and amicide linearon. Those sort of, it was a sandy soil, and those root uptake herbicides were quite damaging. So that's it from me. So that's what happened in 2012. The RCSN, the conclusions were it wasn't all about product, it's about timing and application. So the RCSN was very happy with these trials, and made the decision in 2013 to go and do the same thing again, spend their $50,000 trial budget on wild radish herbicides again, and see if we can gather some more data to add a bit more weight. There was some other trial work in 2012, which I'm not going to show you now. This trial really sums it up the best. But 2013, Grant Thompson came along and continued on from what we'd learnt in 2012 with more trial work in 2013. So I'll just get Grant's presentation up and let him take over. And as I said, we've keep the questions going. Yeah, there's a question there about I may have mentioned it, but what was the weed stage for the first and second application? So the weed stage for the first application was cotyledon to 2-leaf radish, and the second application was 4 to 6 leaf radish, 15 to 20 centimetres diameter, I think. So getting a bit big for the second application. So I'll hand over to Grant now, and he'll take over and talk about what he did with the same agenda in 2013. Go for it, Tom.
All right, thanks, Newman. Okay, so we had 3 large trial sites in the following year. One was at Paul Husband's place in Northampton, which that site was hand-delivered by his agronomist Linda Eastoff to us with a fairly handy herbicide resistance test, which I'll show you shortly. The second trial site was at Broads, which is a farm that myself and one of the other local agronomists have worked on over a few years. We found that population very hard to kill. And then the third site at Jericho, a farm at South Una, with a massive density of radish, where the previous owners had struggled to control radish properly over a number of years, and the new owner discovered a bit of a problem, and we spent a fair bit of time at that farm doing some background work and then some of the GRDC funded work. So we had some really good sites to do work on. Okay, so you can see this is the Jericho site, just a quick little snapshot of what the visuals were like, where we had spray misses or in between plots. Okay, so the layout of our trials were exactly the same as Newman's work the previous year. We had big long strips of a 2-leaf treatment. So this year, in this year we went for 1.5 litres of bromicide 200, so no MCPA, just straight bromoxynil. A litre of Jaguar or 670 mils of velocity, sprayed at the 2-leaf stage of the wheat crop, and those treatments went on at around the 75 litres per hectare mark. And then the second spray treatments at 5-leaf of the crop, these went on with hand booms at 100 litres to the hectare. So you can see there a similar range of treatments to Newman's work the previous year. But what we did, we got all the local agronomists together and surveyed them and asked them what they wanted to see trialled, and plus, you know, had a little bit of creative input into that as well. So put a few bits and pieces of some of the brews that I felt were the most reliable in our part of the world. And obviously there's a few there that are not on any labels, so please be aware of that. Okay, so that's the layout, or what we call the crisscross design, and so we ended up with a huge amount of data coming out of that design. Yeah, and I'll point out that we had 2 nils in each rep, so that'll make a little bit of sense to you when we come to the next slide. So here there's the weed stage at 2 of the most important trials. At the Husband's trial site, up to 200 plants per square metre, with a little bit of shading going on there by the crop and or radish over the top of radish. And at the Jericho site, a little bit more lacking in moisture at the time of spraying, which we do regularly see throughout our growing season. So herbicides always put under a bit of pressure due to a bit of warm weather and a bit of weed stress. There's the application from the spraying, so you can see the husband site, just magnificent coverage there. At the Broad site, that was sprayed in conditions that were a little bit warmer and drier than ideal, but certainly consistent with what a lot of growers have to spray in throughout our growing season. So here's the humdinger of all radish resistance tests. The trial site at Husbands, 100% survival to Group B, 45% survival to Simazine 2 litres. Bromoxynil still having good results. 200 ml of Brodal, 85% survivors. Velocity working okay, as you would expect. 60% survival to 2,4-D ester at 650 mils. Okay. The results of the 2-leaf sprays with no follow-up 5-leaf spray at the Husbands site. So you can see Bromicide 200 and Jaguar. As I said earlier, there were 2 nils in each of those blocks or each rep. So I've got each one of those bars there contains 3 plots behind each bar. So there's 6 separate results there for each treatment. And so you can see that the only reliable early 2-leaf spray that I would be confident in saying reliable is the velocity treatment. Brom MA and Jaguar, with that resistance profile, just was not robust enough.
Just a reminder, the size of the radish and the rate of the Jag there? It's 2-leaf radish, wasn't it?
Yeah, it only got to 2-leaf radish, and the Jaguar rate was a litre.
Yep.
Which I'll just, given the resistance profile around our region now, I just wouldn't muck around with rates of Jaguar anything less than a litre nowadays. Okay, and this is the average yield of the 2-leaf treatments with no second spray. And you can see there that as long as you did something early, we preserved a fair amount of grain yield compared to the nil. And in one of those blocks of nils, you can see that we suffered a huge yield penalty by not controlling radish, as you would expect with up to 200 plants a square metre.
If we just answer a couple of questions before we move on, Grant. There's a couple of questions that have come in. One of them is, have we seen any trial results where adjuvant selection is important? Some adjuvants work better than others. My comment there would be, in this part of the world, years ago you could make a mistake with an adjuvant and you could get away with it because the weeds were susceptible. Whereas now, if you make a mistake and put the wrong adjuvant in with resistance there as well, we get a failure. So I would say you're right that adjuvants are extremely important, and as weeds become more resistant, things like that become very important because those small 1%ers sort of thing make a big difference. Tomo, would you have any comments there about adjuvants?
Oh, without a doubt, that's a critical part of the equation, is getting the adjuvant right, and not only just the adjuvant, but spray conditions, delta T, droplet spectrum, and droplets per square centimetre. It's all about coverage when you're using these contact sprays now, because most of our systemic herbicides aren't working particularly well, so it's all about coverage.
Yeah, so yeah, once upon a time when the weeds are susceptible you could stuff things up a bit and still worked. Now it's all got to be right. One more question and then we'll move on. The focus in Southeast Australia has been on pre-emergence for grass control. Is there any work being done on pre-ems knocking out the early germination of radish in WA to reduce the pressure on post-ems? Well, I would say no, because there's no pre-emergent for wild radish that I'm aware of. We used to have green and low ground, of course, but they were shot long ago in Western Australia. There's no other pre-ems I'm overlooking, is there?
Oh, it's certainly nothing that is what you consider safe and or mainstream. There's a couple of options there that may have some effect on wild radish, but I wouldn't actually call them safe or on label, or that I'd be confident in using. So no, I'd support Newman's on that one.
But it would be wonderful, preempted for radish, but yeah, we just don't have the chemistry. Okay.
Carrying on. Okay, so efficacy on wild radish at 64 days after spraying, with no early spray but a single late spray at 5 leaf. So you can see here we've had some, what I would consider to be some very good results, near on 100% control, and some failures, which is surprising considering the resistance profile of this population. You can see here velocity achieving in the low 90s, which is what you'd expect from a coverage, herbicide where we've had 200 plants a square metre, we've got shading from the crop and from the weeds on top of each other, and we've left it way too late. So velocity, magnificent herbicide, but if you don't get the coverage and the conditions right and you don't go in early, it's fairly obvious you're going to expect some survivors. The really interesting thing here was that given this resistance profile, we got most of these herbicide treatments to work really well. So it's sort of threw a bit of a spanner in the works, really. Some of these treatments are we'd expected them to fail, and they didn't. Okay. And here's the yield of all of those treatments at the husband's site. So don't be overwhelmed by all that data, because it's just a very simple message to come out of that. The blue bars are where there's no early spray, and you can see that it's consistently half a tonne, even up to a tonne to the hectare in some plots, lower than where you did something early. So the red, green and purple bars are an early spray followed by a late spray. And so all we're talking about here is preserving grain yield by taking the weeds out. It's as simple as that.
It's a really important point, isn't it? I mean, we sort of started this work mainly about weed control, of course, and we spent most of our time talking about weed control. But at the end of the day, in all of the trials, the highest yield has happened where we've gone for 2 sprays, the first one being very early. So making money out of controlling radish, these high radish densities, is more, not only is it better radish control, it's more profitable.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll touch on some economics of that shortly. Grain yields of 1 spray versus 2 sprays. So again, this just highlights the value of getting that first spray in there and making it an effective and soft spray, and that's why we do use so much velocity in this part of the world, because it's safe on the crop, it's highly efficacious on radish, just does a good job and doesn't belt your crop around. So look at the yield differences there in all of those treatments by doing something early. This graph here shows a comparison of doing Brom 200 early versus velocity early. And the yield differences aren't huge between the 2 treatments. Certainly we had an increase in efficacy by going velocity early rather than Brom. But what it shows is, again, taking that huge density of radish out early is the important factor. And there we go there, Jaguar versus velocity early, a little bit of up and down between the 2, but again the take-home message is do something early. So as I said, yield advantage of 400 to 500 kilos consistently achieved by doing that 2-leaf spray, followed up by with any number of the 5-leaf options. And yeah, one of those treatments is probably just an outlier in the data, but we actually achieved up to a tonne to hectare extra in one of those treatments there. That was took it from 2.6 to 3.6 tonnes, so it's an increase of a tonne to the hectare by the 2-spray strategy. So in terms of economics, including application costs, a 2-leaf spray treatment of these 2, of the ones that we used, anywhere between $19 to nearly $30 a hectare in cost. Given the consistent yield improvements from spraying early, when we used wheat at $290 a tonne, an increase in net profit per hectare of $90 to $130 a hectare, and in one of them up to $260 a hectare.
just interject with a question. Sharpen. We didn't use Sharpen in any of the trials. Questions come in as Sharpen being used. I'm not 100% sure of the Sharpen registration post-emergent.
Yeah, not aware it's registered as a post-emergent treatment in cereals as yet. We did have some Group G treatments in the trials though with the use of Ecopar, but like both Pete and I said earlier, not registered at this stage, quite damaging on the crop. So yeah, we can't advocate any of those Group G products being used in some of the treatments we've used here. But yeah, I'm sure there's work being done. In fact, I know there'll be some work done this year on Sharpen and other Group Gs post-M.
There's a couple more questions. We might tackle them now. Another one, products with diflufenicin like Jaguar and Triathlon give some pre-emergence radish control up to 4 weeks in some trials. So some resistance to DFF but not widespread yet, is it? So that's more of a comment than a question, or there's a question in there as well. Yeah, I suppose there was a question about the pre-Ms taking the pressure off. I suppose an early Jaguar with some diflufenicin with some residual control is a good thing. And Tom, I would ask for your comments here. We've got a lot of diflufenicin resistance in this part of the world, but we do still see some benefit of that residual effect of your diflufenicin in your Jaguar and Flight type products, or Triathlon, all the different ones with DFF in them. What are your thoughts? Are you seeing some residual effect in the field despite the fact we've got high levels of diflufenicin resistance?
Yeah, so look, I've seen some very good trial work done by some of the companies up here to show good soil residual on emerging cots coming through. However, I would say it's not entirely reliable. In some seasons where your topsoil remains moist consistently for a long period of time, then the residual Group F and cots picking it up as they emerge, provides handy control. In a lot of our non-wetting soils and in some seasons where the Group F layer on the topsoil isn't consistently moist all the time, we don't get reliable residual control. So I would say it's a bonus more than something we would rely on. And yeah, given our problems in the past, particularly in lupins where we have a heap of DFF on the soil surface, we still have very radishy lupin crops. So it's not something I would rely on. Yeah, place a great deal of emphasis on. Let's put it that way.
I guess we have to point out that we are in the lupin belt of Western Australia here, aren't we? We've got paddocks that are 35, 40 years of lupin wheat in some situations, and so this is the hotspot of diflufenicin resistance nationally. Big parts of the country where there's not that level of DFF resistance, and those products would be extremely valuable for sure. So yeah, we're probably a bit biased here. We've got the world's greatest levels of DFF resistance, and we are still getting some value from it. So yeah, okay, let's keep going. Another trial, I think, is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, just to go back to add another little factor to the value of these two spray strategies is that there's no replenishment of the seed bank with resistant survivors when you do get 100% control, and that may seem obvious, but when you do have survivors, there's a massive cost in cultural weed control measures when you do have survivors. So if you can have a clean wheat crop and you don't have to windrow and burn, you don't have to chaff cart, you don't have to do all these other things, there's a massive saving to growers there as well, and you do need to keep that in mind. The last trial we'll talk about is the timing of application one, and it's a very simple trial, but its message is really powerful. So this is the site at Jericho where we did 2 early sprays at 2 leaf, 750 of Jag or 500 of Velocity with Hasten, and then we came back 3 to 4 weeks later at 5 leaf stage of the crop and used some mixtures that are very commonplace in our region. So 800 of JAG plus MCPA LVE at the full rate, velocity 670 plus LVE. Then we threw in a roughie that we hoped would fail, 10 of Logran plus MCPA, and then we played with a new or relatively new co-formulation product of carfentrazone and metribuzin called Aptitude plus MCPA amine. So here's a fairly handy resistance profile at the Jericho site, 81% survival to Logran, and this is a resistance profile test that we did ourselves at the site at the same year with the resistance boom. 43% survival to atrazine, DFF definitely on its way out, 57% surviving 200 of Brodal, 40% surviving 400 ml of Brodal, 15% survivors to 800 ml of Ester 680, and 12% surviving double that rate. Intervix at 500 ml having a pretty poor result, 62% survivors, and 8% surviving 500 ml of velocity, so I'm sure that would be due to shading.
Tom, if I look at that, you just would look at that and think, there's no way we can kill the radish in that paddock. I mean, it's nasty stuff, isn't it?
Oh,
this is what we're dealing with in some of the paddocks around here, and you just would think that those paddocks are full of radish in spring, wouldn't you? If you look at that profile.
Yeah, definitely. It is scary stuff. It's stuff where you'd look at it and you wonder why you bought that farm. But it's not the case. In reality, with good agronomy and good spray strategies, we are making these paddocks very clean and very productive. Okay, so this is the yield results and the efficacy at 76 days after. So you can see the two early sprays there did a very good job. Jaguar achieved 96% control, the velocity 100% control at the 2-leaf timing. As soon as we went to 5-leaf and delayed and let the radish get some size about them, well, that's where we came unstuck. So 800 of JAG and 440 of LVE at 5-leaf, we dropped back down to below 70% control, which in anyone's book is totally unacceptable. The interesting thing is that when we used a higher rate of velocity, up to 670 mils plus MCPA, we still achieved a 100% result, and that's very commonplace in the paddocks of the region, and that's why this region uses so much velocity, because it is very reliable. Even on slightly larger radish, as long as you do your job well. And as we expected, MCPA and a Group B, totally unacceptable, 43% control. And Aptitude, you know, the carfentrazone metribuzin co-formulation there, very reliant on MCPA having good activity, which it didn't at this site. That's why it didn't work too well.
We've also got triazine resistance at the site, and where you have triazine resistance, metribuzin generally fails as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. And in terms of yield, you can just see here where the outstanding two treatments are where we've used for either velocity early or velocity MCPA late. Being nice and soft on the crop, and they were the two highest yielding treatments. Yeah, and that really highlights the difference and the reliability of radish control when you go early versus going late. So when we know we've got a problem population, we go in early. It's as simple as that. And there's the resulting grain yield. So just shows you, again, use a premium product, you get a good result, and it's nice and soft on the crop. Okay, this pretty much just summarises what I've just said there. Highest level of control achieved by velocity early when you added MCPA, which is what we do. As soon as the crop's old enough to take MCPA, we'll add it to velocity.
So we get contact plus systemic action, and it's very reliable. Jaguar early did a good job, and but if delayed till 5 leaf, control fell away significantly.
Yeah, we might just finish up with this one, and then we'll answer a couple more questions. And
yeah, okay. Just a little bit of work from one of my colleagues at Landmark here, and he's very simple but very clear trial work. Just shows when you're using contact herbicides, water rate is king. Just keep the water rates up. Really do need to enforce to your growers when using contact sprays, if you want them to work, if you're investing the money into a premium product, don't skimp on the water. It's a pretty clear message.
Yeah, that's a good clear message. And so that's the painted on bit, isn't it? So 2 sprays, first one very early, painted on. It's pretty simple, isn't it? So another question came through, which I really like. Have any growers in the West just said stuff it and change from a cropping system to a livestock system? Radish equals good feed. And interestingly, no. We had droughts in 06 and 07, lots of sheep left the district then. We are at very high levels of cropping. Lots of fences have come out. Most people see themselves as continuous croppers into the future. And when you look at some of those resistance test results, you would wonder why. But if you come here, you come in spring and you'll see very, very clean paddocks. And it's a combination of this sort of stuff with the herbicides, but also just an obsession with the seed bank and lots of windrow burning, chaff carts coming in, you know, with crop competition, just people taking every single opportunity and never ever letting radish set seed. I mean, years ago we used to grow these lupin crops with big flowering radish in them and think, oh well, a bit of radish in the lupins doesn't matter, I'll get it next year in the wheat. That was sort of the attitude, and it worked for a long time, and then that all came unstuck. So now in every crop, every year, people are obsessed with just not letting anything set seed. Tom, if I could just sum all of that up now, let's talk about where we are in the field now, just talk about a bit of experience that you've had over the last couple of years since you've seen this work. The first spray, if we're going in, first spray of wheat, are you going before the 2 leaf of the wheat, or are you really, you know, you're 1.5 leaf or your 2 leaf?
Yeah, if the opportunity's there and the crop's happy and healthy and growing vigorously, we'll be in at 1.5 leaf with either Jag or Velocity.
And that's it. We've got those 2 products. We've got Jag or Velocity. What's your decision about which one you're going with? What sort of things come into play there, Jag first or Velocity first?
Yeah, okay. If the grower is a big lupin grower and we need to preserve diflufenicin for his lupin crops, then I will avoid DFF in cereals pretty much at all costs. If we're trying to do it on a budget though, we might do a Jaguar spray early at a litre, won't muck around with much slower rate than that, but I'll follow up with a very reliable second spray to tidy up any survivors, which would probably be based on a Velocity mix.
Yeah, and that litre of Jag, what's your biggest radish you would tolerate there? I mean, we're going very early, so they're going to be very small. But
yeah, look, if it's a problem population, crop to 2 leaf I'm quite comfortable with. So edging onto 3 to 4 leaf, that's when I would be starting to get nervous, and I would probably switch over to a double Velocity strategy.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I'm not mad about. Obviously, that was the whole idea of this work. But yeah, there are people backed into a corner here where, like you say, they're lupin growers. You don't want to go the early Jag. You've gone the early Velocity, and then you come back and you've got a big problem. Sometimes you are double Velocity. We probably shouldn't say too much of that. But I mean, if you have got an early Velocity, what are your second spray options?
Well, yeah, interesting enough that, I mean, the trial work showed that as long as you did something really robust early and whittle the population down, then you do have a huge amount of options for that second spray. It comes back to, do you have any survivors to your first spray? And if you do, and if they are big and they're gnarly and we know we've got a scary resistance profile, well then it does whittle down your second spray option very quickly. If your first spray is 100% effective and you're dealing with a second germination of just cotyledon radish again, then we'd probably do our best to avoid the double velocity strategy and use one of the other options, which, you know, we clearly showed that there's a range there.
Yeah, and look, I know growers here that have gone with a litre of Jaguar, which is now low cost, early. They've had a really good kill. They come back at 5 leaf. They've got cots again. They've gone with a litre of amine, 2,4-D amine. Very low cost. They've managed to get excellent control of some very nasty radish at a very low cost. So, yeah, there's all sorts of options if you're spraying small ones, isn't there?
Yeah, well, that's one of the interesting little things we've uncovered, is that even if you do have a population that shows very high levels of phenoxy tolerance, if you get them when they're small with a full label rate of phenoxy, we do achieve very consistent results, don't we?
Absolutely. There's a couple more questions come in, so we've just got about 5 or so minutes to go. There's a few questions here. If you've got any more, put them in now. We'll do a few questions and then we'll wrap it all up. So one of the questions is the 75 to 100 litre spray volumes typical of what farmers are using here, and what spray quality are they aiming for?
Sure. Well, when we're using these coverage products, contact sprays, 75 to 80 litres is definitely the norm. We've seen that time and time again, that if you skimp on the water rate, your efficacy drops off very quickly. So we, all the agronomists in the region recommend high water rates with contact sprays, and the growers are very good at taking that on, to the point where they've, a lot of growers have invested funds into improving their water network around the farm, using nurse trucks to keep more water up to sprays in the paddock, using bigger sprayers. There's a lot of investment gone into water, so yeah, definitely there's been no hesitation at growers upping the water rate.
Yeah, so they are doing it. It's not just us recommending it, they are actually doing it. A few more questions. Is it worth trying an IMI as a pre-emergent in a clear field system followed by in-crop post-emergent as discussed? And keeping in mind we're national here, so the Group B resistance here is probably bigger than other parts of the country as well.
Yeah, look, I think there's a bit of merit in that for sure. Yeah, where it's appropriate and where it's registered, I do see some pre-emergent IMI as being another part of the strategy for sure. As long as it's a registered option, I think at this stage is what I would say.
Yeah, and obviously it's got to be registered. But look, anything in resistant weed management is about double knocks. And so if you've used an IMI pre and you come back with a completely different group of chemistry at the 2 leaf stage of the crop, that's just a brilliant double knock, So, and then you might even have a 3rd knock, and a 4th knock might be harvest weed C control, and a 5th one might be got competitive crop. So on its own, an IMI pre is probably not very robust, but with a range of tools, it makes it very strong. A comment here, with diflufenic in dry topsoil and in the southern cold conditions, frost can limit effectiveness of that residual. Yeah, that's a good point, and I think also, when people, I don't know about you, Tomo, but when guys get a bit nervous about that early Jaguar here, it seems to be when it's cold. If it's cold and the growing conditions are a bit dry and a bit, just a bit not ideal, that's when we get a bit nervous about the early Jag knocking the crop at that 2 leaf stage. Is that what you see as well?
Yeah, that's right. If it's a stressed crop, we go straight to velocity because it's so much softer at that early stage. If the crop's really thundering out of the ground and growing well and soft and lush and vigorous and conditions are good, and we know there's follow-up rain coming, then that early Jag is a lot more palatable.
Yeah. Here's one from left field. Does a radish seed remain viable once passed through the gut of a sheep? Now, I've struggled to find the complete answer to this, and I did have someone comment to me recently that it was somewhere between 5 and 8% survival of radish seed through the passage of a sheep rumen, but I haven't managed to confirm exactly where that research came from, but it is very low. We know that ryegrass is between 1 and 5% survival through a sheep. Radish is down at those very low numbers. And further to that, there are a lot of growers in Western Australia that are grazing chaff dumps with great effect. They're feeding a lot of sheep, and they're not seeing the sheep spread the weed seeds back out into the paddock too far because most of them are digested. Okay, here's one. How long until you see velocity resistance in WA? Well, that's how long's a piece of string, of course. We know that Group H, which is pyrosulfatol, that is the most recently discovered herbicide group in the world, and it was about 20 or 30 years ago. It's at least 20. It might be, yeah. Anyway, Group H was the most recently discovered. I think there's only one population of weeds resistant to Group H that I'm aware of in the world, which is in the US. And I don't want to say the weed because they'll get it wrong, but so far we haven't seen lots of Group H resistant anywhere in the world. So it does appear at this stage to be one of the lower risk groups. However, having said that, it's under a lot of pressure here. We are leaning on it pretty heavily because, you know, we do have people using velocity twice, and that's the only answer that we have in some situations, and some of those people should be towing a chaff cart and so on, and they're not, you know. So I think it's under a lot of pressure. I don't want to have a swing at how long until we see resistance, but it definitely will happen, but I wouldn't put a date on it.
If I could follow on from that, you know, we'll find a way to create mode of action resistance to pyrosulfatol over time. It's inevitable, but I think the weed biology that we've created by using contact sprays, we've you know, started to tweak our system now, that we do see radish that probably shed their pods and grow in clumps in paddocks, and we find it hard to control every radish, you know, big clump of radish with a contact spray because of shading. So we've created an ecosystem essentially where we have radish surviving contact sprays by shading. So we do already see, you know, a survival mechanism by radish appearing in paddocks now.
So if we do predictable, repeated things, the weeds win. So we've got to mix it up. A couple more questions. Are you seeing a reduction in numbers over time? Absolutely. We are seeing massive reductions in the seed bank. So we know that a ryegrass seed bank, we can run that down in about 3 years. A radish seed bank, 6 or 7 years until we get it really low if we're very aggressive, and after 10 years of aggressive management we see very low numbers. The best example of that is the Messinas here that have been windrow burning for 12 years and 3 years with a chaff cart. Got to the point where the last 2 years they didn't spray post-emergent radish in lupins, which is unheard of in this part of the world. Their seed bank was just so low, and yes, they did have a few radish scattered through those paddocks, but the seed bank was just so very low they didn't spray them. Okay, there's a question we've already answered, and that one we've answered as well. And a comment, Group H resistance in the US developed within 5 years. It's not low resistance, it's probably high. Thank you very much for that. That's news to me that it was after only 5 years, and that is a great comment. So yeah, probably wrong of me to call Group H in the low risk group then, but yes, so as we were saying, we can definitely break any herbicide if we put it under enough pressure, and certainly Group H is under a lot of pressure here. Anyway, we will wind it up there. Thank you very much everyone for attending. That has been very worthwhile for me. I've been involved in these trials over the last few years and seeing what's happening, and even I've learned something this morning, so I hope everyone out there has enjoyed it. Weed Smart is ongoing, as I said. If you are listening in and you're not already subscribed to the Weed Smart newsletter, which will just keep you up to speed with what's happening in Weed Smart, go to the Weed Smart website and subscribe to that. Tomo, thank you very much for your time in coming in. You've given up your time to come and show us this work this morning, and thanks very much.
Yeah, not a problem, anytime.
And yeah, we'll sign off there. Thanks everyone. Have a great day. And the next Weed Smart webinar is in 1 week's time. Same bat time, same bat channel. 7:30 WA, 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Next week we're talking with Peter Boutsalis, and he's going to shed a bit of light on the difference between clethodim and butroxidium, so select and factor, and what he's seen with his resistance testing service mainly about when is it worth switching to factor when Clethodim resistance or select resistance